Hello, everybody. My name's Alan Paull, and this is a SSG at Spiel.digital broadcast.
Which means that I'm not starting it off by singing.
No singing here. Well, I think Bez can sing if Bez wants to sing. But this is our second one. This was going to be our first broadcast at Spiel.digital, Bez, but we did an ad hoc one this morning when the whole of Spiel.digital kicked off. And we were kind of having a look at whether it was loading and seeing if we could find our stuff. And Michael Fox dropped in, and that was good. And Rob Harper dropped in, and we had a chat.
Yeah, I just skimmed through the thing. It looks really fun. And hello, Alan Oughton. I see we've already got someone in the chat.
Excellent.
So that's exciting to see.
That is very exciting. Already we've got an audience, this is always the worry, because I've not really done much of this before. So I'm always thinking, is anybody actually listening? Hopefully you can hear us very well out in the land of streaming. I ought to do a little bit more introductions, really, first of all. I think that's where I'm conventionally ought to start. As I said, I'm Alan Paull, and I'm a designer and director of Surprise Day Games, and I'm what has been described as an older gamer. I have been doing a lot. I have been designing games for years, which is quite a lot, really. Surprise Day Games has been going for 20 years, and Tony Boydell and I started a company, and we're doing a whole session. In fact, whole 4 sessions over the Spiel.digital about Surprise Day Games. But that's me. That's enough about me. Let us introduce Bez. Now, I will, first of all, I will share a screen. Let's just share. Here we go. This is Stuff by Bez.
It's not the best website. I really need to improve it. All the images are kind of skewed, but that represents a bulk of what I have done. I'm best known for Yogi. I designed it, so it was formerly known as In a Bind. I self-published it with my own artwork and whatnot. Thanks to lots of playtesters, Rob Harris of Playtest UK, shouts out. Dave Cousins, massive shouts out, who connected with Gigamic. And Dave managed to, because that's why you connect yourself with a bigger publisher, so that they can distribute things and stuff. That's been really successful. And I'm super proud of the LDEC. And Alan Oughton in the comments is even starting to program one of them for Board Game Arena, which
that's very exciting.
Yes. And that's super awesome. And then Kitty Cataclysm. Look, my self-published things, I realize these aren't things that are going to be financially successful. And what I would like to do, once I reframed it, once I was like, okay, I'm going to try and get the LDEC to be self-sustaining, so that I can at least cover more people to help me out with there, more people to kind of foster the development community of it, because part of that is just getting in ideas from other people, designs from other people, and taking them to the next level. So every year there's a headline game. And also doing a few things that I do just for the sake of it. Like, I think I've already talked to you about the Bezzy budget box idea, which is me going back to tuck boxes and cheaper cards, where it's like, okay, you know what? Here's an idea that I have about a poetry game, but it's probably not a thing that I can test with tens of people right now, because, you know, the state of the world and whatnot. And rather than try and worry about it, let's just say, you know what, this is a budget box. This is something that might be lovely, and it'll be printed once and that's it. Kind of like In a Bind. And I mean, talking about designing differently or trying to
creating differently is, yes.
Yeah, it's like kind of one key thing is that, like, a thing is never finished. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
In a Bind, it had 1.5 cards were changed before it went into Yogi. And in Yogi, like, they actually came back to me at a particular point saying, hey, we're going to change the wording of this particular card in this slight way. It's not massive tweaks, but for a second edition, for a third edition, you can continue making improvements. I mean, I don't know what kinds of improvements were made between Snowdonia and the Master Edition, but
Ooh, yes. Well, I think we'll come back to a lot of that in our discussion. Actually, what we were intending to talk about, and we can very easily get deflected from it. But what we're intending to talk about today is is the different. Well, I suppose you could call it the different design processes that Bez and I use. Now, Bez. My approach tends to be quite project managery in a lot of ways, and I'll come back to the detail of this later on. Whereas I suspect, I've not seen it completely in action, I suspect Bez's process isn't quite so project managery, if I can put it that way. But we'll come back to that. But I thought first of all we ought to at least have a little chat about Spiel.digital, since
okay.
that's what we're wrapped up in a way.
Yes, it's a thing that's happened because of the plague, because of this pandemic, and normally it's a big thing, and we love going to this thing, and normally now, it would have started. Oh my gosh. Hello, Jess. It's lovely to see you. And
Hi.
And
Hello,
it feels like...
And hello, Tabby Sunline as well. I wonder who that is.
Look, normally we would have set off from here, what was it, Monday? Anyway, 3 days ago, whatever.
Yes.
Like, it's been so lovely being with you and Charlie, and kind of you two facilitated my adventure to Essen, basically, and it was such a joy. And every year it's been a wonderful thing, and running around and seeing everything. Of course, we can't do that, but how much of it can be replaced? It's like we're still in the place where we're trying to replicate things rather than say, okay, let's ignore all of that, let's create something totally different as a virtual thing.
Yes, indeed. I mean, for example, we missed our usual trip to Dover because we've been driving down to Dover. Obviously, we go Dover, Dunkirk, and then we tend to stop in the late afternoon in Dover and have a little adventure somewhere. We go to the castle or wander around the town, or whatever. Especially if it's fine, go for a walk along the cliffs. And we've missed all that, apart from missing the Essen thing. So it's not the same.
Never going to be the same, but we can capture a bit of the spirit. What are you hoping for? I mean, with this,
with the whole of the Spiel.
Spiel.digital.
Yes.
I mean,
I'm hoping that we'll meet up with lots of people. We've got a few live streams. We're hoping to meet up with lots of people and have chats. And I mean, I think that's what I'd like to capture at least. I mean, okay, so it's games related, and I'd like some sales, obviously. But the main focus of this is actually on meeting up with people. This is what we found similarly with Virtually Expo, that we were able to meet loads of people and have a chat with people, and it's that 4 days we've got to meet with people that we know in gaming world and play games and talk to people and generally relieve the lack of access to other friends that we've been experiencing in the COVID sphere. That's what we're doing. I mean, obviously, ideally, because actually Spiel.digital is quite expensive for exhibitors. I'd like some sales, but to be honest, the main focus is on.
It's the same price as the normal events, isn't it?
It's pretty much the same price, which I was quite surprised about. And I don't want to go into too much.
Yeah, you don't want to go too much into your surprise, Darren.
But it is a bit pricey. Yeah, it's a bit pricey. Let's continue. Let us move on to the topic of the day. I know it's a bit odd because, you see, I ought to explain to people who aren't necessarily familiar with Bez's bedtime blethers, of which there might be one or two in the in listening. I don't know. What Bez tends to do in her shows is we start with some standard items, things like brilliant thing and stuff like that, and quick questions. And dare I say it, it's not a problem, it's not an issue, but the thing that happens is we get deflected, don't we? We always get deflected into quite a long intro. So
I mean, I've
sometimes you
just
have an
started
intro.
enjoying it as part of the show.
It is,
That there's a
yes,
half
it
an
is.
hour
It's very,
intro, but
exactly, half an intro.
not every,
Exactly, absolutely fine. I like the half an hour intros, but it does mean that sometimes we have a bit. The topic can get a bit short. Alan Alton says, "Is Spiel.digital all on Discord?" Well, now that is a very good question, Alan. I'm glad you asked, because the exhibitors are all on the Spiel.digital site, and you can go there and you go to stands, and we have our stand with links to all the games on it, and you know, you can go and play the games through the stand. So it's not all on Discord. You can use Discord. I think a lot of people who know Discord already will be going to Discord. In fact, Charlie, who is sitting alongside me, is actually playing games on Discord for most of Spiel. So probably might not even be in Spiel Discord very much at all. But as I said, this is a 4 days where at least everybody here or hereabouts is doing gaming. So you don't really need Spiel.digital, but at least we know the timing is 4 days. Everybody's doing it. Yeah, and I think also judging this on just a Thursday morning is probably not a good
yes,
idea, because
I mean,
things will
there's no
improve.
point in talking about this, and I was going to suggest that in 2 weeks' time, you know, we do a debrief on my show. But let's get into the topic, because we only have an hour to chat.
So let's get into the topic. And the topic is creating. So it's basically, we're talking about what design process we both of us have. And I thought I'd start, actually. I thought I'd start because I have, for various reasons, because I was writing some stuff, I've had to define how I do it. I mean, I was invited to. I did some work a while ago, writing some blog posts and things on how I design games, and I've had to explain how I design games to new game designers over the years, because Charlie and I, for many years, have run what we call designer days for largely UK-based designers, and for new designers particularly. And so, because we've been around for 20 years as a company and people know us, new designers often ask us, "How do you do this game designy thing?" And that explaining what I do a lot to new designers has meant I have actually had to articulate it in actual words quite a lot, and it's a creative process, so it can be quite tricky. And then a few years ago, I was asked to write a chapter in a book called can you see it? New Traditional Games for Learning, a casebook, and I'll put a reference to that later. And what they wanted, this is actually an educational or pedagogic book, so it's meant for teachers, basically.
I don't know that book, but it sounds like it would be an interesting read.
It's a kind of specialist book for people who are using games in education. And it was when was it published? Oh, I should have a look here.
Well, there's a couple of teachers in the chat, I think.
It's 2014, and they asked me to do a chapter on designing card and board games from the point of view of an independent publisher, and so I kind of did that. So that meant I had to formulate my ideas and make them a bit more crystallized for that purpose. Now, so what I came up with, and I'm not sure if it was a great idea, was a 6-step process, which sounds like a lot of steps, but we'll go through them. So my overall process, which is at least it's what I think I do, and of course that may be only what I think I do, not what I actually do, but this is what I think I do.
Yeah, there's definitely a challenge, and it's like when you're playing a game, it's important to kind of step outside yourself to not only be playing that game, but to say, hey, am I actually enjoying this? During the playtesting process.
Yeah.
And similarly, there's some crafts would you call dancing a craft? Because there's definitely an art to it, but there's also a craft to it, like the technical part.
Yes.
And or
I think of game design as more of a craft than an art. Although there definitely are art form games out there. Definitely, that's for sure. But I think of it more as a craft. So in a sense, some form of process you're learning is a craft process. Now, my 6-step process, I'll just zip through the 6 steps. First step, which is a bit okay. Have a good idea that no one else has had. That's always a good start. This is really actually having ideas is really, really easy. And if you're a budding game designer, you just need to make records of all the ideas that you
having a
have.
good idea that no one else has had, that's pretty hard.
That is pretty hard. But you could have a particular take on something that no one else has got a take on.
And I guess the other thing is that it's not important if other people have had the idea before, just that you have to be other people can't have executed on that idea in exactly the same way.
Yes. An example of I want to go through the 6 steps first.
Alan Alton suggests ducks in space.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. Well, not necessarily ducks in space, that idea, but I want to go through the basic things. Second step, decide on your audience. Who's it for? Okay, we'll come back to that as well. Then design your game. And obviously there's a lot in design your game, but it is only one step. 4th step, develop your game. And I'll go into the difference between design and development, hopefully, in a second. Then the last 2 steps are optional. Sell your game design is step 5, but step 6 might be, if you can't sell it, produce the game yourself. And I think you and I, Bez, have got different ways of doing all that.
So it feels like step 5 and 6 are basically step 5. Otherwise, do step 6. It's more of a 5-step.
It's more 5A and 5B. Yes. Yes. So let's go back to step 1, which is have a good idea no one else has had. Now, this, as you have said, Bez, quite correctly, this is quite difficult. I mean, I had a game prototype which in the end didn't go anywhere. Which was the idea. The idea was, I thought, unique, which was alien invasions through fast food outlets. Okay. Okay, alien invasion through fast. It seemed to me at the time, which
like they have little eggs and then you eat the.
They're aliens who are pretending to be humans, and they're infiltrating the Earth by setting up. Well, I based it on Kentucky Fried Chicken because my view of Kentucky Fried Chicken was it's not really human food, but it's close. Sorry to offend people who like Kentucky Fried Chicken, but I don't really. So it's kind of it's almost human food, but they haven't quite got it right. Okay, so that's the whole basis of the idea, and so you can have a whole range of these outlets, and each alien will have their own different outlets. Some of them might be McDonald's, which I do actually like, but anyway, and some of them be KFC, etc. And I thought, well, that's got to be unique, surely. And I looked on Board Game Geek, I think, or somewhere, and I found somebody else had done a game with the same theme already.
With aliens setting up basically
aliens invading the Earth through fast food outlets. That was the theme that they had.
So they're trying to how is this an invasion? Are they trying to?
They're trying to take over. No, they're trying to take over the world. I don't know. I can't remember the details, but they're trying to take over the world by spreading their fast food outlets all over the Earth. You see, which is what fast food chains try to do. So that idea. Well, the game itself didn't quite come out. Didn't quite make it. Didn't go through the prototype stage. Now, the advantage I had with this particular idea, the name, I can't remember what the name of the other game with this theme was, but I had the brilliantest idea for a title, which was Snack Attack. I thought
Mm-hmm.
I've got to do that because it's Snack Attack, and that just seemed to me to be perfect.
I think that's already definitely a trademark in the crisp industry, but you might be okay in the board game industry. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure that'll be okay. Anyway, so have a good idea that no one else has had, or at least have a take on an idea that no one else has, is our step one. Decide on your audience, which is step two. Now, obviously, that's a really critical one, because you may have an audience which is just your friends. You don't want to make it widely available. It may be an audience of a defined group of 4 people. It may be just family, and you don't care about anybody else. I mean, Tony, one of the games that Tony did a long time ago, which is still played and is, I think, still being developed to an extent, the Black Overcoat game, which he designed really initially for his family, his extended family.
Wait, so is that actually going to be a published thing now?
I don't know what the current state of Black Overcoat
that Tony
game is.
was
It's really
all about
good.
keeping the Black Overcoats game in-house.
Yeah, I think
yes, in their house.
Yes, pretty much. Yes, yeah, pretty much. And in fact, our game Bloody Legacy, which was originally called Hesketh's Legacy, when it was prototyped, that was based very loosely on some of the ideas in the Black Overcoat game. But what I'm saying is, so your audience might not be for wider publication. It might be just friends and family. It might be for expert hobby gamers. It might be for the general public. In fact, if you look at the Spiel.digital groupings,
so that's
of games,
interesting. I mean, that's something that I definitely do differently. I mean, I guess that's where I'm here to kind of, talk about. Shall I just pick apart what I do differently as we go along?
Yes, please. Yes, good idea.
Okay, so in the first step, yes, I will try to have something that's got some unique quality to it. I mean, but it's more important that it's something that excites me. Either it excites me or it brings value to the world. So let's say there's a million games about poetry. I might still want to make my game about poetry, even if it's exactly the same as what someone else has made. I might then be like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to expect to mass produce this, but it might still be a thing that I want to make 50 copies of just to share with friends, because it's like my unique take and it excites me enough to do the drawings for this, because for me, actually doing the artwork is something that is a big thing for me. I know, obviously, when you've got other artists, it's a bit different. The second thing is that when you think about your target audience, I would actually be doing that a little later along the road. I mean, there's always that thing in the back of your mind saying, okay, I'm going to make this. Who is it for? Is it for me? Is it for Chris and McCall and Jess? Is it for, more hobbyist people like yourself or Xate? Is it, I don't know. But I try to, I guess when you're creating that first prototype, you kind of do have that target audience in mind. But to me, this whole thing of, am I going to be excited by it, is kind of the key thing. And especially if it's a simple game, I might just get it onto the table and before I'm even sure who is this for. And with I had a game about which I thought was going to be an even simpler version of Plus, because you don't have to say the exact number, you just have to estimate, is this more or less? And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't have as good a negative feedback loop. The handicap system really doesn't work. It's going to fall apart if you've got children, small children playing with adults, if one's better than the other at this. But it's a game about estimation. And if you're teaching in a classroom, or if you're adults who are of a similar skill level, that's still going to be a fun game. But sometimes playing it can help me discover who it's for, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. Yes, in fact, my own game, which is out, the March of Progress, which used to be called Politics by Other Means, because it was based on Clausewitz on war, or at least my reading of it. That I originally designed. I mean, I'm really thinking this is the more like have a good idea stage rather than the target audience. I originally designed that as a kind of challenge. It's just like one of these 16-card game challenge type things, and to see if I could do it within a very small set of components. And I didn't in a sense, I didn't really have a target audience for that one when I did that idea stage, but I did produce a prototype even then. So I think there's going to be links between all these steps and iterations between all these steps, I suspect. And it was only later on that I decided I would like to publish it, and then you have to look carefully at what the target audience is. But it changes the design, because when I originally did the March of Progress design, it was more abstract than it is now, and it didn't have lots of scenarios, and it was really designed to get across the idea to whoever's going to play it that war leads automatically to escalation and therefore to destruction, and total war leads to total destruction. So that was the kind of basic message. Now, that's in a sense that's more art than craft, I guess. And when I decided that I'd like to publish it, then I had to look at, well, we have to make this into a proper game with winners and losers, and it became rather a slightly different animal. So target audience has a direct influence back on the basic idea.
I mean, I think that's the key thing, though. That's even that step one, that note of what is the key thing that I'm making, what is slightly different. All of these steps can be revisited, and it's hardly as linear as you presented. I mean, even before we get into the messy situation, that's his design and development.
Yes. Well, shall we move on to what I've termed Step 3. Design your game. Yes, indeed. Now, yes, there's nothing difficult about that step at all. It's completely obvious. No, what I've written down here in the book and in the notes and things is, well, in fact, for this, I start my first step is create a prototype. That's actually the very first sub-step of step 3, because this is a creative process. You actually have to create something. If it's still stuck in your brain, it's not yet created, pretty much by definition. So very often the first thing I will do is create a prototype. It might be complete rubbish. I mean, with just using the March of Progress as an example of what I did, I just got a bunch of blank cards and started writing on the cards. I've probably got those still somewhere in the archives, but that was all stuff that only I could read. In fact, my writing nowadays is so bad even I can't read it. Anyway, so it's having some stuff you can push around and just see if that works. You know, that kind of thing. We did it with Tara Seat of Kings as well. Tara Seat of Kings, which was a published game in the end, we started that game by using some blue cards with writing on them, and we just Tara Seat of Kings has a kind of you're building from a base of like 4 or 5 cards up to.
But people talk about creating a prototype as if, yes, absolutely, create your prototype when you can early on. But there's something like chatting to Shem Phillips, and they also do this, like playing it in your mind. I don't know how much of this you do. Like
I do quite a lot of that as well. But then I was stressing that if it's still in your mind, it's not created because you haven't expressed it. You haven't actually.
I would agree, and for sure there can always be surprises when you get it out there. But I would even go behind, that first prototype. I would say that the first step is to. I'm
glad I'm of service. sorry, Beth. Sorry.
No worries at all. And it's lovely to have so many people around watching. But when you start a game, it's not just, okay, what am I going to make? Okay, let's think of some random rules. Those rules have to be considered. And so you have, I would say personally, I start with the central, okay, that's idea. What am I making? That, okay, who is it for? Maybe I can decide that a little bit later, but what's interesting about here? What actually excites me? And then think, okay, what mechanisms can be built around this? And going back to like Seize the Power, which is probably the most complex game I've made. You've not played this one, I don't think.
No, I haven't. I'd like to play it. It sounded really interesting.
Thank you. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get together soon, and even if it's in like early 2021. But So Tiz and I had chatted and we'd communicated, okay, what do we need to represent in this game? Okay, we need to have like some sorts of small economy. We need to have like little bits of getting a job, getting this money. Okay, you need to have some sort of auctions for these things. How are these cards going to come out? Are these power cards going to be things that people pay a set fee for? Is there going to be a flat going round the table continuously auction? And playing other games obviously gives you little bits of a toolbox to dip into. And there's, if you've not played a lot of games, there's Building Blocks by Jeff Engelstein, Isaac Shalev. That's such a wonderful book. I would absolutely recommend it to you. I'm still, it's not meant to be read from cover to cover once I'm halfway through it, because it is actually really good reading cover to cover, where you just say, hey, here's like 6 different auctions that are going on in games.
Toolbox of mechanics is really, really helpful, I have to say. I probably need to get more books on game design, because let's face it, we're all clambering onto the shoulders of giants, really, aren't we?
Then before you make your prototype, I mean, I guess you could have a prototype with just, okay, if I've got a game where it's likely to need 50 unique cards for an entire game, and maybe the final copy of the game would have 200 unique cards because I want a lot of variation in there. I don't know, but like maybe all I need to make for the prototype is 10 unique cards, like just to play that first couple of turns to say, hey, is there anything fun here? Is there anything interesting? And for me, it's just like moving little bits around.
Yes, I mean that was only step 3A, of course. Create a prototype, and then really the heart of it. I think the heart of it. We haven't really talked about the heart of it. We've touched on it, but then the heart of it is a cycle of design, make, test, evaluate. In my process, and I think most people have that kind of thing. And in a sense, design. What I've called design there is that thinking about how you're going to implement something, and then make is create that thing using physical or electronic components nowadays.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like, so it's kind of that imagination and imagining what you might be able to about to make, and then the make is the physical act of making it and then pushing it around on the table. Yeah. Absolutely.
So design, make, test, evaluate, and you just keep going. You keep iterating around those, and of course you can skip. Sometimes you might evaluate something that you've done earlier and go back to make rather than design. So it's a loose circle of I suppose it's probably all would be encapsulated design if you're looking at this in terms of categorization, which I'm trying to avoid. But going through those procedures, if you will, those subsections of the process, is the heart of really what we do. So we're designing stuff, making it, testing it to see if it works, and evaluating: is it good enough? Is it not good enough? Do we want to change anything? Do we scrap it? And eventually,
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And there was this whole conversation going on around Twitter a while back. Oh, who can call themselves a designer? And for me, it's that, have you iterated at least once? Frankly, like, that's a good way to think of it. You imagine something, you make something, and then you test it, even if it's with yourself, and then you actually play it for real, moving around these cards. Even maybe it's a solitaire game, but then you do, or maybe you're playing 2 hands of a 2-player game, but then you do this and you're like, hey, I've learned something, I've realized that certain bits don't work, then maybe we make some tweaks. And I would argue that in some ways, if you've never actually done that iteration cycle twice, like if you only do it once, then I don't know if it's really design. But once you've done it the second time, then it's design. That's how I would almost categorize it as a general.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, because I suppose, yes, if you haven't done it more than once, you've only really put a toe in the water. Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's very, very unlikely. I mean, it's very unlikely you'll get things right the first time. I mean, it so happens that how long this takes is a big question. I mean, I've designed, the quickest I've ever done a game was 48 hours, published game.
Which one?
which was a game called Mind Meld, which was published in Imagine magazine. Which was, I mean, Imagine magazine was a very short-running TSR magazine, and they printed a variety of different articles in there, some historical stuff and all games-related things, obviously.
I mean, I don't know
And
whether
they did
this
have
is...
little games in occasionally. And Mind Meld was one of those. But it's even doing something like that. There were several cycles of iteration to make sure that the thing was actually working as my original intention was. On the other hand, we've got games which, I mean, we've got our game Echolocations, which I'm working on with a colleague, has been going for more than 5 years now, I think.
And from Neo.
From Neo, yeah, and it's not actually finished. So, this whole process can take a long time. We always used to say the average between having an idea and publication for a medium-sized game is probably about 5 years. Of course, it does vary considerably depending on how big it is and what have you.
How simple it is, how often you're able to test it, how much time and effort you're able to devote to pondering it, because that pondering is like a big part of the job. And I don't know if this is true, but David Brain, mutual friend, told me that who made Codenames? Was it Vlaada Chvátil?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So David Brain told me that they read or heard somewhere that it was basically exactly how it was originally designed.
Right. Yes.
And there was no iteration done at all.
Wow, that's quite incredible.
Chvátil managed to make Codenames and then spent about 2 months playing it and confirming that this was indeed the correct way to present this game.
I think that's quite exceptional. Can I just Alan has a lovely one here. Alan is already iterating here. Look, you see, Alan is already looking at this. He's crossed off ducks in space. And how about underwater? You see, it's going well here. Underwater Armadillo Army. I am quite attracted.
I mean, is Rob spreading false information? SSG are already working on it. Can you reveal right now that you currently have no plans for Underwater Armadillo Army games?
Oh, I don't know. Now he's mentioned it. Oh, could be part of a Pocket campaigns, couldn't it? Anyway, it could be. Anyway, let's just try to move on a little bit. So we've done step 3, so we've got a few to go. For me, step 4 is develop your game. Now, by develop, I divide design and development. Now, a lot of people don't, and I'll try and say why I do. Now, for me, development is looking specifically at playability. So, okay, you've got your game design. It may be horribly complicated and got lots of bells and whistles and things in it. Playability is saying, smooth all those rough edges away, particularly cut out things that are not necessary. And of course, playtest like mad. You can never do enough playtesting, and blind playtest as well. So I've got really 4 subsections in that. Look at playability, cut things out. There was a quote that I was going to use.
Is it the one about the game is not finished when there's nothing?
Yeah, that's the one.
But
that's
there's nothing left to
take away. That's right. That's the one, which is by Antoine. Yeah, I've got it here. Because yes, a designer knows he has to achieve perfection, not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. Now, one of the interesting parts of that quote is by a guy called Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who is a very famous French designer. And painter, I think. So I mean, very famous. Yeah, that's right. And the Lyon airport is named after him. Now he died. Sure. There's always a link to World War II. He died in 1944 he was also an aviator, and he died on a reconnaissance mission in 1944, unfortunately. But that quote is really the nub of what a lot of games don't seem to have focused on, cutting out things so there's nothing left to take away. So you only leave in what is essential But what is
Mm.
essential, you do leave in. I mean, you don't just cut things out
Yes.
nearly, but you know, and
And sometimes what's essential is quite a lot. Like if what you're
yeah,
wanting to make is like a big complex web of systems to end up with something like Solkin, then for
yeah,
sure you leave in quite a
yes,
lot.
yes. I mean, I suspect you could look at Solkin and see what bits of Solkin might have been. Could you take anything out of Solkin that's in the published game? Would it be worse if you took
Mm.
some? And I suspect that Tolkien is sufficiently well developed, not just well designed, but well developed. I mean, I haven't done the work, but I think you'd be hard pressed to take anything out of Tolkien except the
Mm.
expansions, of course, which are obviously not necessary. That's the thing that I think that's probably why I don't like expansions, is because if you've got expansions and you've already cut out everything that isn't essential, you're automatically introducing something which is inferior. But
It's
now that's
not
probably
inferior. You're just saying it's non-essential. And also,
okay. Oh,
I think
yes,
the
okay,
thing about
non-essential. Yes,
development
that's
is that
probably
it's for a target audience, right? I
yeah,
mean, this morning I was talking to Maya about like a hypothetical game where you're layering transparent cards and then there's footsteps going on. Look, you could turn this simple idea and build an entire game around it. Say, okay, this is a 15-20 minute family game. We're just trying to move around and this is it. And it's, or it could be like one smaller element in a dungeon crawling game. But look, this is a bit of an extreme example. My point is that you need to think about, as you said, for step 2, the target audience, and it's all about keeping them in mind. But the target audience can vary so much, and what the expansion allows you to do is to offer the base game for those people who prefer something a little bit simpler, but then having something that is non-essential for those people who want a little bit more
yeah,
complexity or modularity or variable setup, which maybe doesn't need to exist in the base game, but can still improve it in a lot of people's eyes.
yes. I think that's a very good point, actually. That and I hadn't really considered that in great amount of detail. Of course, because I mean, I always tend to think I'm designing for a specific target audience, but of course you can widen that, and that would lead you at development stage, at least, to consider extra bits and pieces that might appeal to people who want a bit more what I might consider extraneous faff. But a lot of people like that. And in a way, I suppose you could almost argue that's why minis get put in a lot of games, because people like pimping them up. They're not essential, but in fact,
I'm going to be honest, like I've worked on expansions. Look, it's probably not that hard to work out what I'm talking about. It's where, the expansions are just there for asking Kickstarter backers to buy the deluxe version of the game. And it
yeah,
kind of makes sense. And people who are like, okay, I'm going to really enjoy this. I want all the things. I want this unnamed expansion to have like these 2 extra cards or this thing that changes it. And it's, as you say, I would always recommend that people play the base game first, because those Kickstarter expansions, that's not the core game, and it's going to be very rare that it's an improvement across the board. If it was an actual improvement across the board, then it would
yes,
be, yeah.
Well, for example, one of the comments I had from someone on March of Progress was, "Why didn't you include little soldier figures for each of the scenarios?" Now, obviously, I know the answer to that, because it's just horrendously expensive. We couldn't do that. But in a sense, if somebody wanted to pimp up their game to cover that, you could use little Airfix pieces, or there are other miniature manufacturers, or PSC ones, and that would be perfectly reasonable. Game works just as well with those as opposed to the wooden pieces. So, horses for courses, or whatever, is that one, I think. So, so we've dealt a bit with the cutting out thing. Oh yes, because the cutting out thing is all. Sometimes you get to the stage of development and you just think, this is really not working, and you just want to get rid of it, don't you? I mean, I've done that before. It's the kill your babies stage where you think, well, actually, it's not actually good enough.
That kind of comes, so that's maybe step 3.x or 3.z.
I suppose it could be at
where
any,
it's like,
at
okay,
any
you know what?
stage.
Let's just abandon this whole thing.
Yes,
Let's start
yes.
again with a completely different idea.
Yeah.
But I still don't get a clear idea of how you distinguish development from design. I know we've talked a bit about this.
I was going to ask you, do you differentiate between design and development, or not? Do you not? I know it's a tricky one, because
I mean,
shall I try and explain a little bit about what I think about that from a point of view?
My current hot take is design is making something where you say, okay, this is fun, and development is like, okay, this is already fun. Now I'm going to make it the best version of itself that it can be. So
that's right.
To me, design is kind of like working out exactly what you're making and getting those initial rules in place, although some major rules might change, but it's saying, okay, this is exactly where it is. We've now painted clearly the bullseye of what we want to make. But development, okay, it's fun. Now, how do we make it the best version of itself?
Yes, that's what I mean. I would probably call it refinement for perfection, or as much as you can get. Refinement for perfection. So, I mean, in a way, it's partly what happens when you've successfully pitched a game to a games company, or it can be seen as part of that, because it may well be that you finish your design and you pitch it to a games company, and they want to make changes because they are looking at it from the point of view developing it for publication, and they're looking at it development to increase the potential market, all these kind of things, which may lead to changes. I mean, a classic example in wargame world is the game called Upfront, which Avalon Hill published. It's a World War II skirmish game. Doesn't matter about the detail. The designer pitched that game and to Avalon Hill, and they took it on. Now they used to, when they existed, they had a large development team. And they basically developed it out of all recognition, so much that the designer actually effectively disowned the game. So there's obviously a process of development, or that couldn't really happen. I suppose one could say that they were redesigning the game. You could say that. But I still see it as development. And I've been doing a bit of development, as people will know, and we've got a session on it later on this evening, on redeveloping Kingmaker. Now, I have tried really, really hard to develop Kingmaker, not to redesign Kingmaker from scratch to make it into a different game. Now, obviously, it will be it will blatantly be a different version of the game. But I still see this as it's not my place to change the underlying design, which is that goes to the heart of the difference between design and development. So what I try to do is
first and second editions are a really interesting thing, because there's like one thing that I'm actually starting to work on, which I've not signed an NDA, but they don't want me to kind of talk about it publicly, at least. But it's like you've got to appeal to the people who enjoyed the original. Yes. And it's almost Restoration Games does this so well, where would you consider Fireboil Island, the new version from a couple of years ago, a new design or a development?
Yes.
And same could be said for so many things that they've brought out. And so the line is blurry no matter what you want to say. But I think if we have to draw a line, it's simply that the target has already been painted and you already know this is what we want. And in the case of a second edition, sure, you might be designing small aspects, but you're designing with more specific constraints. You're designing for a purpose, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So development almost feels like a more specific form of design with maybe more utilitarianism and more refinement and a bit less blue sky thinking.
Yes, I think that's right. The term I've used for the Kingmaker stuff is what I want to do with that is I want to retain the essence of Kingmaker. So I don't want people to play my new version of Kingmaker and think, well, this isn't anything like Kingmaker at all. I mean, that because obviously, which is a danger. It is a big danger. I mean, Kingmaker was designed originally and published in 1974, yeah, and now we're in 2020, for goodness sake. So
46 years.
It's been a long time. The temptation, and people have suggested that that I just bring it up to date. Make it into a Euro game or whatever.
What does that mean? Like,
I know. Well,
like,
no,
you
I know,
can just
sorry.
bring it
Yes.
up to date. Come on, just make a few little tweaks, Alan. Why haven't you brought it up to date yet? Come on.
Exactly. It's one of those things
Just
where
lazy.
it's one of those things that I try to impose upon myself. This restriction that I'm not the designer, but as you've mentioned, it's a very grey area, and it's difficult to fathom exactly where the line is that you shouldn't cross. That's the real key. So the way I go about it is I'm thinking about playability all the time. I'm thinking about the playability, and I'm talking about cutting things that are not essential. So and the playtesting and stuff. So you've got to go through those steps carefully. And again, what you'll be doing is develop, make, test, evaluate, rather than design. So because you're hopefully not changing the underlying design, but you're still doing that iteration of
and I know, like,
thinking
Mark
about things.
Rosewater talks about the comparison between an architect and maybe the engineers who actually work out what's possible.
Yes, I think that's a good one. That's a very good one. Now, I would say that there's another book which I have used, because I don't know if people have seen this book. This is called Game Design. How to Create Video and Tabletop Games Start to Finish by Lewis Pulsifer. Now, I've known Lou for a long time, and his process is similar-ish to mine, but he does not differentiate between design and development. So and I think there's a good reason. I mean, I think in a way what you've been saying, Bez, you're effectively you're doing the same kinds of thing in development. I'm talking against myself. You're doing the same kinds of thing in development that you're doing in design. In other words, you're either correcting something or changing something or adding something that's new. You're making it, you're testing it, you're evaluating it, and you're iterating through that whole design loop. But I think that in development you're constrained to an extent.
Yes, I think that is it. That once you've accepted a certain, I don't know exactly where that line is. I don't think that there's a clear point at which you can say, okay, this is design, this is development. But I think that there is definitely a point at which you can say, okay, I have taken on, even if I don't know exactly where I crossed the line, I've definitely crossed it by now. I mean, I would say that for Yogi, because the original release at the time known as In a Bind, I would say that it was in design up until I did the Kickstarter. The graphics hadn't been done. At that point, I had not started any development. And then it was actually thanks to Bauer's Game Corner. Forrest Bauer said, hey, we've been trying this much simpler version with my kids. Just draw a card, read it out loud, do what it says. And honestly, for Forrest Bauer, I owe them so much, them and Dave Cousins, because if Forrest Bauer had not suggested that, I would not have tried it. I would just have assumed that this is too simple. But once that was done, once I decided, okay, this is actually works for the game. But then after the Kickstarter was done, it was time for me to work out, okay, exactly what are the 56-ish cards, because Cards Monday, with whom I was printing, it's 56 cards in the sheet. I ended up with, I want to say, 55 cards plus one blank. Anyway, the point is that I sat down on my own in the room saying, okay, can I do these all together? Because I've decided that my constraint is that I want all of them to be possible together. That's not a rule that affects anyone who's playing it or that affects their experience, but I want to make it so that there's, even if you've got 10 cards, the 11th isn't going to directly contradict any of the previous rules. It might be impossible, but only because you're not flexible enough.
Yes.
It's never impossible, only very difficult. And so I kind of contorted myself and I played with these cards until I had like a group of 55 that were all simultaneously possible. And I was quite chuffed with that. And then to me, that is the development side. Obviously, that differs a lot for like what's a party game. And then I send it out into the world. And, you know, something like even making small tweaks from one edition to the other, like Wibble, the eponymous game for what used to be called the Wibble ++ deck, where it used to be resets at 4 cards. Now it's resets at 3, and I'm honestly feeling like resets at 2 is a slightly better experience once you understand the game, but it's just a little bit harder to explain initially. So resets at 3 is, but it's like you've got this continual try to make it as good as possible, whether it even after step 5, even after it's been published. And I think that's the key thing. If anyone wants to take away anything, it's just that it is so much iteration and pondering and trying things, and it doesn't work. And then maybe later on you get another idea and it works slightly better.
Yes. Also, I mean, one thing that just briefly touch on in the development, there's the whole process of creating artwork. Now, I know you integrate that when you do designs quite well, whereas I'm not really a graphical person, so I tend to either leave that to somebody else or do it at the end, and that I think of as part of development as well, because it's the underlying design is there, and you're putting the artwork on it. Now, of course, the artwork and the physical component mix might well influence, and well, probably should influence the game itself. So, I mean, there's a refinement process going on there. I'm conscious that it's already 5 to 2. We haven't actually really touched much or any at all on step 5, which is sell your game design and produce the game yourself. I'm suspecting that we might leave those to another time.
Actually. I mean, it's just
because
pitching your game is such a big thing. Self-publishing is such a big thing, but it's kind of, you don't need to self-publish. You don't need to mass produce it. When I do a board game design 101 talk, my main phrase is whatever you want to do, it's okay. And if you want to make a game and it's a game that there's only one copy of in the world, whether that one copy is for a loved one or for your family, just for you, because it's like meant to be all the treasures and the shared memories that you have are integrated into this game. Or maybe you want to print off like maybe 10 copies and you can do that via some print on demand service. You can do that and it's totally valid.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's very true. It doesn't have to be selling your game at all. I mean, it can be just making it for family and friends. That's not a difficulty, all the way up to mass market production when you're working in conjunction with a major manufacturer. And a lot of that, there's a lot in there, huge amounts in there. And I kind of still think of that as being part of the overall creation process. But obviously, but sometimes you don't have any, as a designer, sometimes you don't have any influence on that, like the upfront designer found to his cost, to his own estimation at least.
I definitely think I agree with you that the kind of components do tie in to the game that you're able to make. If you're able to make plastic cards with transparency, or if you're able to make a dexterity game that you're flicking pieces or you're moving pieces rather than obviously your body being the pieces as in yogi. But like, then the weight of those things matters so much. I'm trying to think of other examples, but like even within that manufacturing, you can then iterate. And I think that the key thing is that this whole creation process, it's all about iteration.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm finding a particular problem, for example, with Kingmaker, in that because we can't play physically face-to-face with a group of people at the moment, either we don't want to or we, actually are not allowed to, it becomes much more difficult to work out the physical components. So that part of the development of the game is really, really difficult, and I'm having to address that particular problem. For example, how big do the counters need to be? And I've got a copy, which I've made a physical copy, but that's just my view of how big those counters need to be on the map, and it's necessary to get other players' involvement in this so we can actually see, yeah, that counter's a bit big, it's a bit clumsy to fiddle them around, otherwise it's just what I like, not what really the design.
Yeah.
I am conscious that we are 2:00, and I know some people want to go off and do other things. Shall we move to a kind of wrap up? Bez, are you happy that we do a
could
wrap up?
do, yep, absolutely.
Let's do.
I think we've already talked about how everything is integrated, like the idea, and you can keep coming back to earlier parts. And I think the truth is that whilst within those details, and we could talk for probably days about those details. In fact, we might have already talked for days about those details.
Probably.
But within those details, there's so much to say. But this broad structure of, I would agree, having the idea of what you're going to do and then solidifying it as you go along. And tangentially, there's the working out your target audience, which becomes more and more concrete as you go along. The design, like what you said, pondering it, imagining it, realizing it. And it's a lovely, I think that's all these steps kind of tie into each other. And it is a set of steps that we will all go through, with step 5 being the actual physical final manufacturing production.
Yeah. So what we've talked about today is we've talked about the 6 steps, which was my overall idea, and we've hung our discussion off that, which was have a good idea no one else has had, decide on your audience, design your game, which is the prototypes and design, make, test, evaluate sequence, develop your game, which is all about playability, cutting things out, play testing, blind testing, etc. And then we had our final step, which we haven't really covered, which is sell your game design or produce the game yourself for some audience. Now, I think the key things we've had out of here, which are less process oriented, if you like, is very valid ones. You need to have something that excites you as a person. And that can be very individualistic. It might be something that doesn't excite anybody else much, in which case your audience is going to be quite small. But it might be something that excites a lot of people. I think Codenames is a great example of something which caught the imagination of not just the designer and a small audience, but a very, very wide audience. And in a way, I think both you and I, Bez, we design what we want to do. So we're not designing. I don't think we're designing to a particular template necessarily. We're not. I was going to say we're not journeyman designers in the sense that we're always doing things that we want to do, things that excite us because we're producing our own creations. Right? I think some people maybe are doing things in ways. Obviously, they probably are doing it because they like to do it. But are they being creative? Are they just following a trend? Is that why we've got so many?
I mean, that's quite a narrow definition of creativity. If you think that Dominion clone is not creative, I mean,
I'm not. Oh, sorry, I wasn't saying not creative. I was saying that the way we operate is we like to do things which excite us, and it's very important to us, I think, that we want to be excited by it ourselves, and that influences the design process really. And then we talked about design, make, test, evaluate, and I think we agree that is an overall useful and well, pretty much most people will do that. We also talked about development, and I explained why I thought it might be a separate part of the process that is contentious to an extent, and you could certainly see that as very similar to design, make, test, evaluate, and it could be as part of that. And I think the good thing, things that we came out of expressing that is make it as good as possible. That's the stage when we're making it as good as possible, either as a separate development step or as part of the design step. And it's kind of refinement for perfection is what you're aiming that there. And automatically that means there's iteration throughout the whole of the design process, and that's kind of what we covered, I think.
I would say so. Iteration is a good key word.
I'll put the books.
The question about
there's these 2 books that I've mentioned. New Traditional Games for Learning, a case book by Alex Mosley and Nicola Whitten, And then there's Game Design: How to Create Video and Tabletop Games Start to Finish by Lewis Pulsifer. Lou has written loads and loads, and I've spelled his name wrong. Look at that. With the wonders of StreamYard, you can change these things quite quickly on the fly, which is very helpful.
And the first book was meant to be aimed at teachers. So would you recommend that to Jeff, for example, if someone's in Thailand and teaching English?
I think yes, it is. It covers quite a wide variety of different topics. It's got for example, it's got one on the creation of a board game to speed up the course creation process. So I mean, it's very pedagogically or sort of course development based. There's lots of pedagogic stuff in here. Game-based learning is a vehicle to teach and assess first aid competencies, for example. Quite a nice one. A Game of Phones: Design, Development, and Delivery case study. So it's got a lot of case studies because it is called a case book. So I certainly recommend this book for people who are seriously looking at games in education. Now, loads of teachers use games all the time because they're such a great medium for teaching things.
Absolutely.
But this gives you a lot of thought-provoking ideas for how to do that, and some background in why you might want to do it. So I certainly would recommend that. And Lou's book is very good. I mean, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Lou says in here and in his other writings, but I think that he's had a lot of very useful insights, and it's definitely worth getting. By the way, I just should say I don't get any royalties for this because I'm not. I'm not. I got paid a small amount of money for the chapter, so I have no financial interest in that book. There are other books, of course. There's lots of books on professional wargaming nowadays, which is I haven't really touched about. I haven't touched on professional wargame design, which is a bit different. And there are loads of other books on game design that one could acquire nowadays. So I think we're nearing the time in which we should bring this to a conclusion. Bears, have you got another book? Oh, thank you. That was the other one. Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design and Encyclopedia Mechanism. I must get that. Engelstein and Shalef. I must get a copy of that. I seem to remember looking for a copy and thinking that's quite pricey. So
it is quite pricey. Yeah. I would say that the density of information is really worthwhile.
Yeah.
And look, you read through it and it has some examples for each thing. There is at least one mistake in the book, which I flagged up with Jeff Engelstein, and he said, yeah, sorry, there was a lot to write. Clearly we made at least one mistake, which...
Well, that's not bad. One mistake, that's not bad at all, is it?
It was basically one of the games that he referenced. I said, hey, this is referenced in this section, but I can't see the connection. And he said, oh, sorry, we didn't mean this game. Yeah, that was the wrong reference. But they kind of... For each type of mechanism, they put a few notable cases. So, for example, if we look at a form of movement is chaining, where pieces are stationary but built out in chains. Yeah. Expedition by Kramer, Laser Riders, Quartermaster General, and Through the Desert is a form of movement, and one of many different forms of movements you might want to consider.
Yeah, that all sounds good. Referencing Through the Desert and Quartermaster General in the same sentence, I think, is pretty darned good. Really. Yes. So, is there anything else that we've missed out that you would like to say, Ez? Or
I look.
Mind endless topic.
If you want to make things, and I like to say, work out why you're making it, because are you making it for your own ego? Because that's okay. I don't think people should see, making things for your own ego is a terrible thing to do. Because if you're making things because you want to be the one to share it with the world, or you want to be responsible for people's fun, I'm not going to lie, this is a big part of why I make games. Because if you want to make games for just playing around with them, and if you want to have if you work out why exactly you want to make these things, that will inform exactly how you do these things. But I think what you've touched upon is that iteration is such a key thing, and within that iteration, it's making the thing, but importantly, learning from that thing. So
Yes.
when you are playing it yourself, really be honest with yourself. Am I enjoying this? If I am enjoying it, is it just because I'm enjoying the process of making it, or is there something actually about the mechanisms as they are that brings me enjoyment? If I'm playing it with other people, it's easy to say, well, they didn't enjoy it because they're not the target audience.
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. And so conversely, don't be too hard on yourself. But even if they aren't the target audience, maybe they have something really valuable to consider, some really valuable feedback. And I think it's mainly that would be my follow-up and conclusion to this thing. Just be open to learning and in that iteration cycle.
I think the enjoyment one is absolutely critical, Bez. I'm glad you've said that, because basically, if people aren't enjoying it, I mean, if I was just redeveloping Kingmaker, and the people I was playtesting with said, "Well, yeah, it's fine as a redevelopment of Kingmaker, but I really didn't like that at all," and if I want them to enjoy it more than the original Kingmaker, preferably,
Of course,
obviously, and that's absolutely key, because you know, part of what we are doing game design for is so that people can enjoy it. We won't go down into the fun enjoyment thingy aspect of it, because there's different people can enjoy Kingmaker and get absolutely trounced, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Cheddar Monk 2, for putting up that. To put up again, that's a link to the book I was.
I wonder who Cheddar Monk 2 is. It's lovely to have you in chat.
Hello, yes, and thank you to everybody who has made comments and who hasn't. Thank you to Alan Alton and Xade, and for Tabulous Online for dropping in, and for Jess, and other people who I may have missed in that, Cheddar Monk 2, and who anybody else I may have missed in that. So thank you very much.
Rob Harper.
Oh, Rob came in as well. Can I just shall I put your links up then?
Yes, please do. I will.
Here we have
stuffbybez.com, stuffbybez.bigcartel.com, where you can buy my stuff, twitter.com/stuffbez. Unlike Alan, I do post a lot on Twitter. Instagram.com/stuffbez. Unlike Alan, I post pictures. I do lots of stuff unlike Alan, and unlike anyone, to be fair. I don't think there's anyone else streaming daily at 10 a.m. UK time. You know, if there was, then I would ask them, hey, maybe do it like a little bit later or a little bit earlier. That feels like if someone were to start streaming every day, I'd be like, why are you doing this?
If you haven't gone and seen Bez streams at 10 every day, you really need to go and watch Bez's streams. And they are great.
I have a Discord which there's not much going on there right now, but we chat about. There's a cat chat where everyone is welcome to share a picture of a cat. It's the closest that we've got in this day and age to people drawing pictures and sticking them up on a wall. And you can share as many pictures of cats as long as you drew them all. So if you want to draw 100 pictures of cats and stick them all up on the wall, you are allowed to do that.
Excellent. We will remember that one. I don't draw. It's wasted on me, Bez, I'm afraid.
I think you could. I never got you to draw a cat from my wall, did I?
No, sounds a bit scary. But anyway, if you want to get in contact with me, I am mostly on email at surprisedadgames.co.uk. I have a blog called Unfinished Games, which is on WordPress, and it's also on BGG. On Discord, I'm Alan E. Paull, and on the various games sites, I am Bentham Fish. There's a story there. And I'm Alan Paull on Board Game Geek, largely because once you're on Board Game Geek, you can't change your name, which was a bit of a shame because I wanted to be Bentham Fish. So that is me. So it just remains for me to say thank you all very much for listening to our Creating Differently session, SSG at Spiel.digital. And later on today, we will be having another couple of live streams. One in about 3/4 of an hour on a history of surprises, which is basically Tony and I talking about surprise day games. chaired and refereed by Ben Maddox from
You
5
say
Games
refereed. Are you expecting there to be some sort of fight or
No, I don't.
competition?
No. Chaired by Ben Maddox. It'll be fine. We've got one every day. This Spiel.digital. So do drop in and find out why on earth we did this thing.
Ben is a
so
wonderful interviewer, so I'm really
Ben is
looking
very,
forward
very
to
good.
watching this.
Yeah, it should be good fun. And then this evening at 7 p.m. UK time, we have a Remaking Kingmaker session when I will be talking about what I've done with Kingmaker, and a couple of my playtesters will be in the stream to heckle, give their views of how we're going, and you can see whether I've actually gone against my own principles, or whether I've redesigned it, or whether I've just developed it. So I commend those to you all, and thank you very much for watching. See you later. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
It's been an absolute pleasure,
Bye,
Bez.
bye,
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you for watching along.